Hey all, and welcome to the 5th episode of our Master Material series. So nice to see you again. In this series, we're actually going to do a little bit of cleanup. We're going to add in some texture variations to our albedo and get everything prepped for when we start actually mixing our materials together. So, without further ado, let's hop right into it. So the first thing I'm going to start off with is probably just a little bit of general cleanup in our material functions folder. This is completely up to you, but I like to keep things organized, so I'm going to name one my normal functions. And another one will be my albedo functions, PBR functions, and I'm going to have a UV functions as well. And I can just start to move our materials here. If things look a bit different, it's because I recently upgraded to Unreal 5.6, so the taskbar is updated. If you're still sticking with 5.5 or lower, just know that the only real change is that our move gizmos and stuff are up here, and then our views, view modes and camera and everything is over on the right side. Okay, so I've moved my materials over there. Let's see, cloth shading is also going to be part of our albedo function. Our ARM is going to go in our PBR. Our ARM world alignment in PBR. Also with our CTSH functions, put those in the PBR folder. Our detail normals in our normal functions. Our normal material function in our normal functions. Normal world alignment in the normals. Scale normal in the normals. And then of course our world aligned normals with rotation and quality settings. Going to go into our normals. And this last one, the world aligned texture with rotation, we can put into our beat. Okay, so with all that cleaned up, and then I'll just leave my base material function here and just have my different materials to select from. What I'd like to do is let's build out a texture variation function for our normals. This is going to be used mostly with environments and is to help break up texture repetition. And we'll show you what it does here in a moment when we create a material. So let me create a material instance. And just say environment. So maybe we're doing something like a wall. Alright, so there we go. Okay, so now we've got that preview. Get on the side where we don't have the reflections. Okay. Let's go into our albedo functions and we're going to create a new material function. If you're in 5.6, it's going to be under advanced material function. And we'll name this mf underscore texture variation. Save this. And we'll open this up. So for our texture variation, what we are going to do is grab a couple regular texture samplers, 3 to be exact. Let's go ahead and change the sampler source to shared wrap. We're also going to need ourselves a texture object parameter. And we can call this texture variation map. The default map, which I like to use, should already exist in the engine. Let me see if it's in this one. So see, macro, just look up macro. Yeah, right here. So T default macro variation. And we can go ahead and use this as our texture for our samplers. And let's see. The other thing that we can grab is our world aligned texture. And we can grab 3 of these. Which is also going to take our texture variation map as the texture. Okay, so next thing we're going to need to do is give these textures some coordinates. So we're going to start with a texture coordinate node. If you type in coordinate, you should see texture coordinate. And then we're going to multiply this by 3 different values. So I'm going to hook up my texture coordinate into my multiplies here. And then these are going to go into our UVs. Okay. And the values that we're going to give these, the first one is going to be 0.2134. The second one, I'm going to use a value of do 0.05341. And our final value on the bottom multiply, we'll just do 002, should be fine. Once we have that set up, we also need to pass values into our world aligned textures. So what we can do is, let's do some constants. So we'll need 3 constants. So I'm going to hold 1 click on my graph to get a constant, and then just Control-C, Control-V to duplicate those. And we'll use the same values in our constants. So this one I had at 2134. This middle one I had at the 0.05341 and 0.05341. And this bottom one I have at 0.002. Okay, and then we will give ourselves a few multiply nodes. And off of these multiplies, we're going to do 1 more multiply, because since this is world space, we're going to need to scale up the tiling by default. So we can put a value of 500 into these, into the B of these multiplies. and we'll plug our previous multiplies into the A. And we'll use this here as our texture size. Okay, and then we're going to need tiling so that we can control the tiling of these guys. So let's put in a scalar parameter by holding down S and clicking in the graph, and we will call this texture variation tiling. And this is going to then plug into our B. And then if we also want to tile our source down here, we can also add in an additional multiply. And also use our texture variation tiling for the B in these multiply nodes. Alright, so now we've got texture variation set up for both world alignment and regular UV space. So the next operation that we're going to do is combine these textures to make our variation. So we're going to take our XYZ texture. I'm going to do an add node. And we're going to add 0.5. Off of the add node, we're going to then multiply. For our middle texture, off of the XYZ texture, we're going to do another add. And this is going to be also 0.5. And another multiply. A shortcut is if you drag out the pin and just hold A and click in your graph, you'll get an add. Same thing with multiply with holding M. And then we'll need another add node at 0.5 in the B. And another, actually, then we'll just put this solution into the B of our multiply. And then we'll put this solution into the B of our top multiply. And then what we're going to do is take this whole solution and we're going to do a final multiply for the variation intensity, which if we hold down S, click in here to get a scalar parameter, we can call this texture variation intensity. And we'll leave a default value of 1. Plug that into our B. Now we're going to do the same setup for the bottom, so we can actually just copy all of these nodes and paste them down here. And for our R value, we'll plug the R values of our samplers into our A. Just like so. And then we'll also take our texture variation intensity and plug it into the B of the multiply down here. Lastly, we're going to want to control the contrast of this whole solution. So what we can do is then Let's give ourselves a reroute. I'm going to name this TV UV. Texture variation UV space. And this top one, I'm going to do a named reroute. And we will name this TVWA, so texture variation world align. And then we will mix these two. So I'm going to grab myself a 3 vector by holding down 3 and clicking into my graph. And we can set this by default to be white, which should be 111 in the R, G, and B. Can do a desaturation node. And going to put just a constant 1. The desaturation will just prevent any actual colors bleeding if values are set differently from the contrast. So from there, we're going to take off the desat and do a lerp, and this will be the A of our lerp. And the result of the lerp is going to plug into our output. Now, all we need to do is decide whether we're using world alignment or if we're using UV space. So let's do a static switch. In the true, we can grab our named reroute, which is TVWA. For the false, we can grab our other named reroute, TVUV. And for our value, we're just going to get a static bool parameter. And we can name this bool texture variation. Actually, I should say use texture. Or use. So I name this use world aligned texture variation. Sorry, doing all this on the fly. Just kind of thinking, what's a good name? And then, so this is going to then go into the alpha of our lerp here. Another nifty thing in 5.6 is they have these preview nodes, so you can click on the preview node to sample it at any time, which is kind of nice. So the other thing is my texture tiling. I'm going to put this at a default of 1. And yeah, just got to update. There. So we should have 3 different variations of the texture that will overline atop one another. So we can go ahead and save this function. We're going to want to put all of these parameters into their own group. So let's open our master material and take a look at where we can seed it. So with my master material open, I can take a look at all of the different groups that we've set up thus far. So yeah, we could do 0.1. So let's do a group 0.1 material settings, and then I'm just going to use the bar, and we'll call this texture variation. And then we can go ahead and assign all of our parameters to this group. And actually, let's convert this 3 vector here into a parameter. And we're going to call this texture variation contrast. And assign that to the group. We'll assign this boolean to the group. And I believe that should be everything. Now we just need to make sure that they sit in the proper order. So if you come back over to our parameters tab now, the way they currently sit, we're going to change this up. So the boolean I'm going to put first. So I'll give this a set priority of 0. Let's do our texture map next. So priority of 1. Our tiling, then 2. Our intensity, just 3, and our contrast of 4. Great. So with that function done, we can now go ahead and close it. And we're going to turn our attention here to our master material. There's a few things I want to make sure that I may have missed in the last episode, which is mostly just, cleaning up some of these rogue textures here. So on the material mask sampler, I had forgotten to set the sampler source. So this is just going to be a shared clamp. And then what we're going to do, because we want to mix actual materials together, we're going to change the setup that we have here of the output with our base material to actually output a full material function. And what we can do with a full material is we can break it apart and just access the channels that we need, such as when we go to feed it into this detail normals function. I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about in a minute. So with our base material function, here, we can go ahead and double click and open this. And we're going to replace all of our outputs. So first thing you need to do is we're going to do a make material attributes. Here, we will only need one output node. So I'm going to grab the albedo one, and what I'm going to name this output to, I'll rename it to material result. Then off of where I had that output, I'm going to do a named reroute and name this final albedo. We're going to replace this output normal. We can delete that. Yes. We already have a final normal out. Down here in our ARM EM, we can delete that output. and do a named reroute, which is final ARM EM. And we're going to do the same thing for our CTSH map. So delete that input and named reroute. Final CTSH. All right, and from there, we are going to hook these into our material attributes here. So let's grab our final albedo and plug that into our base color. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to save real quick. All right, plug that into our base color. And grab our final normal. That goes into our normal. And grab our final ARM EM. And from here, we can do the split. So we can do a break float for components. R is going to be our ambient occlusion. G in the roughness. B in metallic. And A will be our emissions. Future Casey here. Actually, I'm going to make a slight change. Right now, I hooked the emissions up to its own output node. You won't need to do that. You can go ahead and just plug the emissions into emissive color. I correct this a little bit later on. And then all we have left is the CTSH, so let's grab that. Final TCSH. It will copy this. Float 4. And the only thing we really need from this at this point is going to be our, let's see, T is going to be the subsurface mask. And B is going to be the specular. Let's go ahead and grab our opacity map from the albedo. Generally, opacity maps are packed into the alpha channel of the albedo. So we can do, off of this pin, we can do a component mask. So I was looking for. And we'll just grab this alpha value right here and check that to true. And that will go into our opacity. Thinking about it. Sorry, yeah, I think we'll be fine. Actually, let's just output our emissions into the emissive color, because we can break this apart later. Sorry, just a slight correction. So this is what we should have. Normal out. And I'm just going to comment this and say these are out final material. I apologize for being so indecisive. I'm kind of thinking what's going to be the most modular approach for y'all, so. All right, let's go ahead and save that function. And we can close it. And what we have now. Hey, future Casey once again. So one more mistake that I correct is that I leave the pixel depth offset as its own output. What we're going to want to do is actually incorporate this into our material output. I will address this later, so you don't have to follow anything that I'm doing right now as far as the PDO. We'll correct that a little bit down the line. Everything that we don't need there. Oops, except for the pixel depth offset, we do need to keep that. Let's keep the PDO. So we have the PDO output and we have the base albedo. We're going to rename this base albedo to base material. And so over here, we still need to hook up our normal again. So we can grab that base material named reroute that we did. And what we can do is we can get material attributes. And what get material attributes allows us to do is break apart this material and access all of the things that we plugged into it simply by assigning an array element here. So we click the plus and we'll get an index. And for this index, we're going to choose normal. So once we have our normal, we can then plug that into our detail normal. Now, once we've finished, we will no longer need this base normal input reroute, so we can delete that. And instead, off of this, we're going to say set material attributes. And from here, we'll also do another array element and choose normal. And we'll plug the result of the switch into the normal. And then we need to get the rest of our material. So we're going to take the material attributes from our get and put it into the set. And this setup is how we'll actually add in all of our other features to our material. I hastily put the CTS map over there, so let me just do a named reroute here. Let's name this CTSH height. That's what we're using it for, is height. And I'm going to save before I do this, so I learned my lesson from crashing. CTSH height, and we'll plug that into our height map. Now it's complaining because, of course, we've broken everything over here, but that's quite okay. So we can delete. Oop, we still need our pixel depth offset, sorry. We can delete everything above pixel depth offset. And instead, no. We need to incorporate this into the material, sorry. Open up your base material function. Let's find where that pixel depth offset sits. I believe it's right here. Let's do a named reroute. Again, name this PDO. We can delete that output. And over in our material attributes here, we can grab the PDO and we'll plug this into pixel depth offset here. And save that. We can close that. We no longer need this reroute node. And we no longer need this named reroute here either. So we should have just a blank material input. And from here, let's do another named reroute declaration node. Let's call this final material. Then on our master material output node, all we need to do then is just check use material attributes. This is going to collapse this down to just an attributes output, and then we can collect our final material and put that in our output. And the reason I just use a reroute instead of connecting at the end is I would suspect that this graph will start to evolve and we may need additional space just to organize everything. But speaking of organizing, The next thing that we're going to do is clean up this whole mess. So we're going to create some material functions for our actual parameters, and we can rename them and reuse them quickly to hook them up to our material base material function to set up for other materials when we start mixing them. So to do this, let's go back to our material functions. And the first thing we're going to want to go to is our albedo functions and create a new material function. You can skip this completely if you're okay with all of your parameters hanging out. Just know that you would have to do a little bit more work moving the nodes around when cleaning them up. This is why I'm just choosing to do it this way, so that I have a node that houses all of my parameters as opposed to just copying and pasting the functions individually. So we're going to name this mf underscore albedo settings. We can open that. We go back over to our master material. Let's grab everything that is to do with our albedo. So, and I'll need to interject once more here. You can't output the texture objects or bools in a material function, so don't bother copying these over. I had forgotten about this, but I'll be reminded here in a second. Make sure I look at what we've got set in our albedo here. So albedo saying, so we want albedo map, intensity, cloth tint, tint, and desaturation. So it's going to be these 5 nodes here. Let's go ahead and copy those. Control C, go over to our material function, Control V. And here we can just grab ourselves some outputs, 5 of them. And make sure that we follow our structure here. So we've got the albedo map. Yes. Yes, so that's only going to output, sorry, this is only going to output a 3 vector. So we'll leave the albedo map there for now. We'll just output these values. So our intensity, our tint, sure I'm using the vector 3. Yes, we are. And desaturation. And we can rename these outputs to intensity, tint, tint, and desaturation. This will be a bit cleaner when we go back and have to duplicate material parameters for other materials. Save this albedo settings material function, close it, and now we can go ahead and grab our function and add it to our master material. So we no longer need these 4 nodes. We can delete those and reconnect our pins. Let me save. And then just to make these align, I'm going to change the intensity to be number 2, actually in my spot here. So I'm going to open up cloth tint was 1. Tint is 3 and desaturation as 4 on our sort priorities. Go ahead and save and close that again. And now they'll be organized here. And we can also create a material function for our material settings. So let's back out of our albedo functions. In our material here, we can create the material functions folder. Let's go ahead and create a new material function. It's mf material settings. Let's go ahead and grab all of these. Control C to copy them. Open our material settings material function and paste them. And we're going to need ourselves some outputs. So let's see. Oh, can we not do bools? Yeah, we can't do bools. My bad. Some of these things will not work. So let's forget about the bools. This will be tiling. This one will be world align contrast. This final one is texture rotation. Save that. Let's pull that into our material function here. And then organize them. So we have, it's like our rotation is going to be first. So we can leave that at 0. Our contrast is going to be 1. And then our tiling we'll put to 2. Save that. And hook up our function. So rotation, put into rotation. Contrast is going to then go into our tiling is 1. Contrast, it's going to be 2. Yeah, there we go. Now they're aligned correctly. So tiling into UV2 and world align contrast into projection contrast. Delete these. Keep the normal map, and now we'll need our normal. So we'll go into our normal function, same thing, and create a new material function. This is mf normal settings. Go ahead and open that, and what we're going to need to copy, yeah, I think what we can copy is we can copy the normal intensity and flatten. Everything here we can go ahead and add, with the exception of the texture objects. So let's go ahead and select all of that. Let's go ahead and copy all of these, and then we can paste them in here. So for the first output is the intensity. Second one's the flatten. So I'm going to do 0 and 1 for the priorities. Then our next output is going to be for detail text tiling. And this one will be. So all I'm really doing in this section is posting material function outputs and then naming them to match their parameter counterparts and then hooking them up. And then of course we're going back and we're setting the priorities on our outputs from 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. from top to bottom. I wanted to speed this up just to save time on the video, but feel free to pause and set yours up or skip ahead if you need to. Okay, so with all of that set up, we can go ahead and save and close our normal settings material function. Close this one too, since we don't need it. And back in our master material, we're going to go ahead and drag out the normal settings. And for this first one, we only really need the intensity and flatten, so we'll replace those. We can delete these parameters. And then we can, I'm going to save this real fast. Oops, not the map. Material. And I'm going to copy this function. And we can paste it over here. And we can just go through the process of replacing these. So we can start with our detail tiling. We can then set one up for our parallax occlusion mapping. So I'm going to go back into my material functions folder, create a new material function. I'm going to name this palm settings. Open that up. And we're just going to copy our palm controls here. And we set the outputs for our palm. Looks like we'll need 7 or 6 outputs here. So this is height, spell it, min steps, max steps, max step angle, reference plane, and one more for our height map channel. Save that. And let's drag our palm settings now into our master material. And we can replace these. So the quicker way would actually be to hold control. We can grab this texture height input and we can move it to height. Let's actually organize, click back into palm settings real quick. Let's organize these outputs. So this should be 0, 1, 2 on the priority. Set priority, forgot to set those. 3, 4, and 5. Save that. Close it again. All right, so that's better. And we can just move with control click, just move these over. And now that we got palm settings taken care of, we can copy this and paste this over here and hook it up. Let me save real quick. All right, the last 2 functions that we'll need to do is for our ARMEM and CTSH. Let's go into our PBR, create a material function. REMEM. Well, let's put all of our settings into here. Just do MFPBR settings. Let's open that up. And we're going to go ahead and grab this is the master channel. Yeah. Okay, so we can go ahead and copy all of our settings here. And we'll paste that in our PBR settings, and then of course set up our outputs. So the idea of behind doing this is that you only have to go through the work of setting all of these up once, and then you can just reuse them. You will need to create duplicates for different materials if you need to change the material names, however. But changing the group is a lot easier than having to reset up and organize all of your parameters again. So just like we did with all of the other material function, material settings, we're just going to go through and create our outputs here and name them to our parameters and set priorities 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. all the way down from top to bottom. Save that material function, and we will drag this into our master material. And we can go ahead and hook this all up. I'm going to save this real quick. And we'll start moving all of our pins over here. And most likely the last thing that I would like to solve for in this video is let's do just one more for our fuzzy shading. So I'm going to save this master material. Go back to my material functions folder and create a new material function. And this mf_fuzzy shading settings. Open that up now. And we can copy all of our fuzzy shading parameters and paste them in our function. And set up our outputs. So to save more time in the video, all we're going to do here is I actually copied over some of the cloth parameters. We'll put that in a separate material function. But we're doing the exact same thing that we did previously with the other material functions. So just go ahead and create yourself a fuzzy shading material function and hook up those parameters. And once we're done with that, we're going to create one more material function for the 4 cloth parameters so that you can copy and paste them into there and hook those up into your outputs as well. Don't forget to name all of your outputs and set their priorities. And then we'll come back when we are putting them back into the master material. And we can now bring our 2 material functions into our master material. So I'm going to close those that we made. Let's grab our cloth settings and drag it in. And our fuzzy shading and drag that in. And then we can move our pins over. Darkness, power, and brightness. Same thing with our cloth. Intensity. power to silk settings. Delete these. Move this over, we can comment this, and we're going to call this base material. Over here, we can comment this, and we can call this detail normals. Awesome. And of course, not forget to comment our material output. Great. Let's save that master material. Okay, to wrap up the episode, there's one thing that I'd like to do. And if we remember at the start, we made our material function and our texture variation material function. If we drag that now into our base material, we can then grab, we can then piggyback actually off of this to our final material. And we can multiply this texture variation by our color. So let's go ahead and do another get material attributes. Let's change this from normal to base color. And then we're going to also need to set material attributes and change that to base color. And for this texture variation here, we can then multiply the result to our base color. And then move our base color out to final. And I believe there's one thing I need to make sure of. If we if we wanted to set up texture variation to not be an option, we'll then add in a switch here, static switch parameter, since we're in our base material, and we can call this use texture variation. And this will end up being the true. We can then branch off of this for our false. And then that solution is going to go into our final material out. And let's go ahead and assign a group for our texture variation. Cool. We can put that under our material settings. Now we can save our master material. And we can close it since we are done with it. And in our material instance now, we can open this up. And we see that we have used texture variation. If we check that to true, we should get our texture variation controls here. We can control our contrast and our tiling. And if you see what it does, it actually breaks up repetitive textures. And the other nice thing is now that we have a world alignment solution, if you're using this as a wall, we can actually also enable our world alignment with texture world aligned. And then we just need to adjust our tiling since it's now world aligned. But that will help break up your walls and make them look cohesive. And then, all right, so that should wrap it up for our 5th episode of our Master Materials series. In the next episode, we'll actually start to get into taking these materials and combining them using masks. So until then, we'll see ya and happy deving.